You think you own this house. You think you own me.
But there are things you don't know. What? How? I raised you. I taught you values. And this, kicking me out, this is how you repay love?
I didn't mean...
Appearances are deceiving. My life, my wealth, it's far more than you ever imagined.
You mean $100 million?
Greed is fleeting. Respect is earned.
And maybe, one day, you'll earn back my trust.
I could fight back. I could yell.
I could ruin you. But true power
Is in calm, in patience, in dignity.
Imagine being kicked out of your own home. By someone you raised, nurtured, and treated like family. Someone whose first words to you weren't, "thank you" or "I love you," but a cold, final order to leave. Margaret Sullivan had spent decades building a life rooted in care, compassion, and sacrifice. She had taken in David, a young boy who had lost everything, and given him not just a home, but a family. She had watched him grow, encouraged his dreams, celebrated every success, and forgave every mistake. She had poured her heart and soul into raising him, never asking for anything in return, except a little respect. And then one day, that respect was shattered. Margaret came home to find the locks changed, her suitcases neatly stacked on the front steps. A single cruel note pinned to her door, "You're no longer welcome here, leave." Shock froze her in place. Her chest ached, her hands trembled, and for a moment it felt as if the world had turned upside down. The son she had raised had betrayed her in the most personal way imaginable. Neighbors watched in silence, unsure whether to intervene or respect the apparent family drama unfolding before them. Margaret's heart broke, not just for herself, but for the boy she had loved like a son, who had allowed greed and entitlement to overshadow gratitude and love. She could have called lawyers. She could have screamed, demanded justice, or sought revenge. She could have let anger dictate her next move. But Margaret did something different, something most people would never think to do. She paused. She breathed. She reminded herself that the life she had built was bigger than any moment of hurt, bigger than the betrayal itself, because Margaret held a secret that her son and nearly everyone else would never have imagined. Hidden over decades, quietly and carefully, she had accumulated wealth far beyond what anyone could see from her modest lifestyle. Investments, properties, and business ventures had quietly grown into a $100 million fortune. Completely hidden from the eyes of the world, and most importantly, from the son who thought he had the power to control her life. This wasn't about revenge. This was about patience, wisdom, and the perfect timing of a revelation that would leave an entire family stunned. What happened next would change everything. It would reveal that appearances can be deceiving, that kindness is a strength, and that sometimes the most powerful lessons are learned in silence, until the right moment arrives. Margaret's story is a reminder that even in the darkest betrayal, truth can turn the tables in ways no one expects. Margaret Sullivan had spent her entire life giving love, giving care, giving her very soul to those she loved. When tragedy had struck David's biological parents, leaving him orphaned and alone, Margaret didn't hesitate. She took him in, embraced him as her own, and dedicated herself to raising him with the warmth, guidance, and support that every child deserves. She worked tirelessly to ensure he had a safe home, a good education, and every opportunity to succeed. She sacrificed her own comfort, often going without so that David could have more. Every choice she made, every long hour she spent working or worrying, was for him. And for a long time it seemed worth it. David grew up smart, ambitious, charismatic, and unfortunately, increasingly selfish. He had inherited his mother's cleverness and drive, but not her humility. He learned to take advantage of her kindness, assuming it was infinite, that there would never be consequences for his arrogance. Then one cold Friday morning, Margaret's world turned upside down. After her weekly book club, she returned home expecting the familiar comfort of her own living room. Instead, she was met with an empty driveway and a shock that left her stomach in knots. The locks on her front door had been changed. Her suitcases were stacked neatly on the driveway, as if placed there by an indifferent hand. and pinned to the door was a note so blunt it felt like a slap across the face. "You're no longer welcome here. Leave." Her hands shook as she rang the doorbell. She pounded on the door with the desperation of someone who couldn't believe what was happening. But no one answered. Not her son. And not anyone. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering to each other, unsure if they should intervene. Margaret's heart felt like it had been ripped from her chest. Her own son, her own flesh and blood, had turned his back on her. I raised him, she whispered to herself through blurred tears. And this is how he thanks me? She spent the night in her small car, curled under a thin blanket, the cold seeping into her bones. Every gust of wind, every passing car reminded her of the betrayal she had just endured. The weight of loneliness and heartbreak pressed down on her, heavier than any winter frost. And yet, even in that dark, cold, humiliating night, Margaret did something extraordinary. She didn't call lawyers. She didn't yell. She didn't plot revenge. She simply waited, patient, composed, because she knew something that David had no idea about. A secret so powerful, it would change everything he thought he knew about his mother. Margaret's calm wasn't weakness. It was preparation. She had hidden far more than love and guidance over the years. She had hidden a fortune, and the moment to reveal it was coming. David, blinded by arrogance and entitlement, assumed Margaret's modest house, her worn-out car, and her quiet lifestyle were all she had. In his mind, she was just an elderly woman living on a fixed income. Someone easily discarded once he decided he was done tolerating her presence. He bragged openly to friends, smirking as he described how he had finally kicked out the old lady, and how he planned to sell the house, pocket the money, and move on with his life. To him, it was victory, a demonstration of power over the very person who had raised him. But David couldn't have been more wrong. What he didn't know, what he could never have guessed, was that Margaret Sullivan had spent decades quietly, meticulously building a life beyond appearances. While she had sacrificed much to raise him, she had also been an astute investor, acquiring properties, stocks, and small businesses under separate accounts and legal entities. Every purchase was carefully structured, every account hidden, every asset invisible to anyone, even her own son. Over the years, those investments had quietly grown, compounding into a fortune that David had never suspected, a staggering $100 million portfolio entirely hidden from his eyes. That night, after the bitter sting of betrayal and the cold of sleeping in her car, Margaret didn't panic. She didn't call friends for comfort. She didn't lash out. She didn't cry herself into despair. Instead, she walked calmly to the public library, accessed her secure accounts on a computer, and took deliberate action. She transferred a portion of her wealth into a separate trust she had set up years earlier, one that David had absolutely no access to, one that ensured he could never touch what was rightfully hers. As she watched the transfer confirm on the screen, a small, quiet smile spread across her face. Not a smile of malice, not a smile of revenge, but a smile of satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing that justice, patience, and foresight will always outlast arrogance and entitlement. The next morning, Margaret called her lawyer. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with purpose. "It's time David learned a lesson about respect," she said. Every word carried weight. Not threats, not anger, just the quiet, undeniable power of someone who had been underestimated her whole life, and who now held the ultimate leverage. David had no idea what was coming, and Margaret intended to make sure he never forgot it. A week later, David returned. He was brimming with confidence, smug in his belief that he had finally won. He had imagined this moment countless times, walking into the house, brandishing the keys, finalizing the sale, and asserting control over the life he thought he had conquered. In his mind, Margaret was nothing more than an obstacle, an inconvenient figure who had raised him and now needed to be removed. He knocked on the door, expecting her to be intimidated, expecting her to stumble, perhaps even beg him for mercy. But when the door swung open, he froze. Margaret Sullivan stood before him, taller than he remembered. Her posture was calm, her gaze steady, her composure unshakable. She wore no sign of fear, anger or desperation, only quiet authority. "David," she said softly, almost gently, yet every word cut deeper than any yell could. "You think you own this house. You think you own me. But there are things you don't know." She extended her hand, offering him a thick folder. The leather cover creaked as he took it hesitantly. Curiosity mingled with a sense of unease. As he opened it, his eyes widened in disbelief. Inside were documents he had never imagined could exist. Bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, and even shares in companies he had never heard of. It was a meticulously organized dossier that revealed a hidden empire, a $100 million fortune his arrogance had never suspected. David's face went pale. His lips trembled. "What? How?" he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Margaret smiled, calm and resolute, a smile that carried the weight of decades of wisdom and silent strength. "I raised you, and I taught you to value family, integrity, and respect. You kicked me out for greed, for selfish ambition. Now, you understand that there's more to life than possessions. And more importantly, you had no idea who I truly am." The words hit him like a thunderclap. Every assumption, every plan he had made crumbled in an instant. The arrogance that had filled his heart evaporated, replaced by shock, confusion, and an unspoken recognition of the depth of her patience and foresight. David sank into the couch, utterly speechless, staring at the folder as if it were a mirror reflecting not just wealth, but the magnitude of his own mistakes. The reality was undeniable. Margaret was far more powerful, far more prepared, and far wiser than he had ever given her credit for. For the first time in his life, his arrogance had no defense. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't storm out in anger or make threats. She understood that true power wasn't in revenge, it was in calm authority and the quiet demonstration of values. Instead, she set clear terms, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "Respect me. Learn from this. And maybe one day you'll earn back my trust." David sat frozen, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. For the first time in his life, he had no way to assert control. The house he had thought he owned, the power he believed he had taken from her, none of it compared to the life Margaret had built quietly, meticulously, and with integrity. Every investment, every property, every financial move she had made in secret was proof that appearances can be deceiving. What he had considered weakness, her kindness, her humility, her patience, was actually her greatest strength. As news of the confrontation spread quietly among friends and neighbors, Margaret's story became more than gossip. It became a symbol. People admired her wisdom, her restraint, and her ability to hold composure in the face of betrayal. The lesson was clear: greed is fleeting. Impulsive anger leads to regret and respect. True respect is earned, not demanded. The twist, of course, wasn't just the $100 million she had hidden away. It was the life lesson embedded in that fortune. It was proof that patience, foresight, and moral strength outweigh brute force and entitlement. It was a reminder that the strongest people often appear the weakest, and that silent resilience can change outcomes in ways anger never could. Margaret didn't stop at teaching her son a lesson. She continued with her life, unshaken, her spirit intact. She quietly donated to local charities, supported small businesses in the community, and ensured that her fortune served a purpose beyond her family. Her generosity wasn't limited to bloodlines. It extended to everyone who needed a hand. A reminder that true wealth is not measured in money alone, but in character and actions. David, meanwhile, had learned a lesson he would never forget. His arrogance had crumbled, replaced with humility, awe, and the slow recognition that he had underestimated the person who had given him everything. Margaret's calm strength, her patience, and her hidden wisdom would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. A lesson more valuable than any inheritance she could have left him. And in that quiet victory, Margaret proved one undeniable truth. Sometimes, the most powerful actions are the ones taken silently, with dignity, patience, and unwavering integrity. If this story shocked you, if you've ever felt betrayed or underestimated, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe so you never miss another story that will make you think twice about appearances. And tell me in the comments, if you found out a loved one had secretly 100 million, how would you react? Respectfully, greedily, or shocked into silence?